Entrepreneur, author, and financial consultant Marc Bernstein helps high-performing entrepreneurial business owners create a vision for the future and follow through on their goals and intentions. Onorato is a business growth strategist who blends psychology and business together to create conscious leaders and business owners who impact the world. Founders Forum is a radio show podcast sharing the real stories behind entrepreneurship as founders discover more about themselves while providing valuable lessons and some fun and entertainment for you. Now, here's Marc and Ange.
Good morning, America. How are you? Good morning, Philadelphia. We're live on the radio this morning on WWDB, 860 AM on your radio dial, but you're probably hearing us as a podcast. And this is a podcast, as you heard, about founders of businesses. And we always start with an interesting topic of the day. So I had a very interesting evening last night, Ange, and that was my induction to the Union League of Philadelphia, which if you asked me 30 years ago if I would ever be a member of the Union League, I would have said never, because it was a much different.
Never say never.
It was a much different place then. Never say never is right. And I, in my interview, you have to have an interview to get in. It's a whole year-long process. This is a big deal to get in. And I originally had reasons of convenience and things like that why I originally got interested. My office is closer, wanted to spend more time in Center City, Philadelphia, et cetera. But I also saw some things about the Union League, some of their decisions they made I wasn't sure about and things like that. Then a friend started taking me to events there while I was going through the process, and I went to some urban affairs things, and we talked about the future of Philadelphia, and we talked about the principles of Lincoln, which is what the Union League's all about, which are things like, obviously anti-slavery, abolishment of slavery, abolition back then, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of free enterprise and business. And I thought, wow, these are all things that I've kind of fought for all my life. In fact, in high school, I interviewed a woman that was around during the Civil War at that time and who was involved in the Underground Railroad. So I knew a lot about all that and all that history. And I thought, wow, this really aligns for me. And I thought, even if I don't agree with all the decisions, I'm better on the inside having a voice than if I'm on the outside not having a voice, kind of thing. So, and the induction was all about what the principles of the league and all that again. And it made me something that I ultimately became very proud of. So, and we're here about business. So I think our whole show, if there weren't for free enterprise, we would have a whole different show. In fact, we've talked to people and are going to talk to people from Eastern Europe and places where they didn't have those opportunities, or other places who have come to America for the opportunities that we have. So as much as all the negativity about the U.S. today and all the protests and all the things that are going on, my belief is still it's the greatest place. It's the greatest experiment in democracy that the world's ever seen, and it's still the greatest place to be, and it's up to us to make it better. So I just said a lot. Any thoughts, Ange?
Well, I could just summarize in one or two sentences that I think what I'm hearing you talk about is just finding a way to get back to, our core principles as a nation and first principles even, right? It's just, why were we founded? What were the concrete things that we were founded upon? And if there's organizations or things out there that you can get involved, or we all can, and use that platform for the greater good, then I'm here for it.
I want to hear from our guest today, Dr. Stephen Hess, who I'll formally introduce in a minute. But Steve, Dr. Hess, do you prefer Steve or Dr. Hess on the radio?
I think Steve is fine.
Steve's
Thank
great.
you.
So Steve, any thoughts on that?
No, I love the Union League, and I have an office right in Center City, just a couple blocks from the building, and it's not only a beautiful building and very historic, but it's a wonderful organization, and I love that it supports free enterprise and business, and I know a lot of members, and I think it's a great organization, a lot of great leaders in the community in Philadelphia. So I think it's wonderful, and congratulations on your induction.
Thank you. Well, Steve, so full disclosure, Steve just became a doctor of mine. And one of the reasons, quite frankly, was because I joined the Union League and he's 2 blocks away and he's got a great reputation. So let me introduce Steve. It's a perfect opportunity. Dr. Stephen Hess was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and is still a long-suffering Buffalo Bills fan. So we're from Philly, so we can relate to that. Although We haven't had that long a drought at this point. Anyway, he spent 4 years in North Carolina and graduated from Wake Forest University, a great school, before returning to Buffalo for medical school. Dr. Hess then moved to Philadelphia in 2004 and completed his dermatology residency at the University of Pennsylvania. He refounded, and he'll talk about this, Center City Dermatology in 2012. So welcome, Steve, officially. Great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into your practice, how you refounded it, and some of the challenges that you had along the way, which is always an interesting thing about entrepreneurs to hear.
Absolutely, and thanks for that kind introduction. So, after I finished residency at University of Pennsylvania, and that's a great training program in dermatology, great institution, I was a little bit nervous about maybe going out on my own and just hanging a shingle. So I went to work for another practice in the area, and I spent 4 years there, and I learned a lot. I've learned a lot not only about dermatology, but I learned a lot about how to run a business, and in fact, one of the interesting things is I learned not only what works, but I learned some things that I thought didn't work well, and sort of little nuggets I put in my head about if I ever own my own practice, how I might do things differently. So after 4 years, you kind of came to a decision point about whether I would stay on at this practice as a partner, or possibly, go out on my own. And it was a difficult decision to make. Ultimately, I deferred that decision and went and joined another practice for a year because I wasn't quite ready and maybe not sure about going out on my own. But then after that year at my second practice, I had an opportunity to open my own business. And essentially, Center City Dermatology existed. A colleague of mine had started it about 2 years prior. It was a very small office. I think it had 5 employees, tiny space, and she and her husband were going to leave the area, and she was either going to close the practice or sell the practice to a large hospital or organization. So the practice was essentially going to cease to exist. But I decided to step in and sort of, I'll say, adopt or refound Center City Dermatology. I said, I'm not going to let this go under. I'm going to take the reins of this, and we're going to keep this going, but we're going to change it. We're going to refound it, and we're going to grow and expand. And so, I made that leap. I guess it would be 5 years after finishing my training at Penn. That was in 2012, and I haven't looked back since.
I'll just make a quick observation, which could lead us to the next question, which is, I know today you were 5 employees then. I know you're about 30 employees today with 2 locations. There's been tremendous growth in a 12-year period. So let's talk about that. How did that happen, and what were some of the challenges you faced along the way towards that?
Yes, that's exactly. We started with 5 employees when I took over and refounded this, and now we have about 30, 2 locations. I think probably similar to, so I have 2 children, and I think similar to the difference between having one child and then going to 2 children, that's a big change. And I think the same challenge existed, right, with my practice. So going from 1 location to 2 locations, I think that was one of the biggest leaps and biggest challenges we had. And I didn't just open a second location in the city. The second location is actually in Exton, Pennsylvania. We actually initially opened in Downingtown, and we opened the second location about a year before the pandemic hit. So that was another challenge, right? So we opened the second location. Things were going well. We're seeing a lot of patients. We're getting busy. And then all of a sudden, the world shuts down. And so trying to manage how to keep the business afloat, in light of the restrictions and limitations with what we could do. So that was another big challenge. And then, of course, because the 2 locations are not really in close proximity to each other, I had to hire entirely new staff for the second location. I didn't want to have my staff commute between the 2 offices. It's okay if I do it, but I didn't want to ask them to do it. So then the challenge was finding the right staff to open the new location, and then to, sort of make us, we're still one organization. So rather than having 2 completely separate entities, I wanted to make sure that they were integrated, and the staff worked well and communicated well with each other, we're one big family at Center City Dermatology.
So on that, Ange, you probably have a couple questions about that. Finding the right people and keeping the right people is something we're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, and not only in general, right? No matter any industry, we ask every guest every week, their perspective on this. But I think in healthcare, particularly during and kind of post-COVID, as you mentioned, how did you go about even identifying, attracting people to come in? Because I feel like the whole healthcare industry was so beaten down and so exhausted and whatever. But what do you attribute the fact that you found the team that you have, and how did you keep them engaged even when maybe the business wasn't operating on all cylinders, and how does that fill into the culture that you have today?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it was challenging. Even before COVID, there were challenges. Trying to find the right people. But I think after the pandemic hit, it was even more challenging, right? Because a lot of prospective staff members maybe didn't want to work in a healthcare setting. They were worried about potential risks of infection and things like that. So that's tough, and I think word of mouth is probably the way that I found most of my best employees. I try to make it we work hard, but I try to make it a pleasant environment to work, and then so some of my employees would actually refer friends or people they knew to come in and interview. And when I think about adding a new employee, I always want to make sure that they're going to fit in with the rest of the team. I don't want to bring someone in who's going to disrupt, the culture that we have. And so, but certainly there were challenges with respect to with the pandemic and in the healthcare setting. You're exactly right.
In love, business, and war, I say war jokingly, but it sounds like it belongs there. But personal introductions are always the best. And it sounds like that's your experience in terms of getting employees as well.
I agree. I mean, if someone can recommend, make a personal recommendation, I think that always tends to work out better than just, finding somebody on a job website or just randomly. It seems, in my experience, to work out better that way.
I think it's a really important thing for not just this conversation, but, I've been in executive recruiting for close to 30 years, and I've always said, there's so many things out there now. People say, market this and use technology and, blast your need or your job or your opening or whatever it is. But word of mouth and being referable, whether you're a speaker, whether you're a candidate, whether you're a business owner, I think really just building an environment where people want to refer it.
Yes.
Is it's a topic that's not spoken about enough, I feel like, in the entrepreneurial or really the corporate space. I think sometimes it's the things you don't have to spend a lot of money to do, but just do the right things and attract people that way.
Yes, I agree, and that's well said. I would also make the same point, when it comes to, our clients, our patients that we see. I mean, I don't do a lot of advertising to attract people. I think a lot of that is word of mouth. And if we do a good job and treat our patients right and treat them with respect and provide them with good care, they're going to refer their friends and family. So, we've kind of grown the business by word of mouth as well, just with our clients.
I'm also in a professional services business, as you know, and that's same in our business. It's almost all word of mouth. And we have people talking to us about marketing, and it's probably a good idea, but I always wonder about if that sort of corrupts our culture or attracts the wrong kind of clients and changes the way we do business. So it's always something to consider, because word of mouth is really your best source.
Yeah, a lot of marketers like to talk about the demographics. Get your target market, and here's all the strategies you can do. But it's really about the psychographics of that, right? It's the right kind of person that's the right fit for your services that can take your business to the next leap just by their own whisper down the lane.
So we only have about a half a minute, so I'm going to give you a question and maybe not answer it yet. And then we're going to take a quick break. And that is, if this we're now in May, today is May Day for those listening live, of 2024. If this were May 1st of 2027, Steve, and you're looking back on the last 3 years, what would have to happen in your life, personally, professionally, and otherwise, for you to feel that was a successful 3-year period? So with that, because it is commercial time, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about that.
Do you suffer from acne, eczema, or psoriasis? Are you worried about your moles and need a skin cancer screening? Are you experiencing hair loss? Would you like to rejuvenate your skin without surgery? Dr. Hess and his team are here to help. Center City Dermatology is a premier medical practice with locations in both Center City, Philadelphia and Exton, PA. Dr. Stephen Hess and his team provide comprehensive, contemporary, and customized skincare to patients of all ages. Their services include medical dermatology, dermatological surgery, and pediatric dermatology. They also offer a full range of aesthetic and cosmetic services, including Botox, filler injections, laser treatments, and hair restoration. They're accepting new patients and take most insurance plans, including Medicare. Call today to schedule an appointment. 267-687-4437 for the Philadelphia location or 484-237-2433 for the Exton location. Or visit centercitydermatology.com.
We are back. I like that music on the commercial, TJ. With a nod to TJ Gleason, our engineer and quasi-producer these days. And Ange, what were we just talking about?
Yeah, so just before the break, we were talking about, kind of 3-year vision, where if it's 3 years from today, May Day, where are you? Where's the business? What are you thinking about? What are you celebrating?
Okay, so 3 years from now, looking at my vision, I would love to have a third office location. I think moving from 2 offices to 3, again, I'll make the analogy with children. I've heard that once you have 2, it's not that much more challenging to go to a third. Although I don't know that, but I'd like to have a third.
I have
location.
a friend that says in a 4th too, so just keep that in mind. That's your thing.
Right. So it could snowball, right? We could end up with 4 or 5.
I'm the first
right?
of 3, and I think my parents survived, so.
But right, a third office location is definitely something I'm considering. Sort of fighting the trend, I would say, of dermatology practices, being sold to private equity and in selling my business. I'd like to expand my business, and I'd like to add some additional services as well. In particular, I'm looking to add Mohs micrographic surgery to my practice, and that's a procedure that is done very specifically to treat certain types of skin cancer, predominantly those that occur on the face and head and neck area. So that's a service I'd like to bring in. And I'd also like to significantly expand the hair restoration part of my business. So we do offer hair restoration services, including hair transplantation, and that's a goal of mine over the next 3 years to grow that part of my practice.
Let's talk about that offline.
Yes, we could. And then, a couple other things I'm thinking 3 years from now. I've recently started working with a couple of folks in the area, and we're trying to found a local dermatology and aesthetic conference in the city of Philadelphia. That doesn't really exist right now. So a friend of mine who's a plastic surgeon and another gentleman, we're kind of coming together to see if we can get this off the ground and start this local dermatology and aesthetic meeting. And, so that's another goal. And maybe on the personal side, a couple things. I've got, as I said, 2 kids, and I'm my older one in 3 years will be in college. So I will hope that I have helped him make the right choice there. And my younger son will at that point probably be in the process of picking his college. So I'd like to think that we'll have made good choices there. And, one other thing is I've been training Brazilian jiu-jitsu pretty seriously for about the last 7 years. And I have my purple belt now, and I'm hoping in the next 3 years I might be close to at least getting my black belt. That's a personal goal.
You just motivated me. I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I've been off the mats a little bit from COVID and a hip injury, but I love to hear that. It's such a life-changing sport.
It's amazing. We'll have to talk offline. Maybe get on the mats there. So
one quick question for both of you, but what's the difference, real quick, between Brazilian jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu?
There really isn't. It's jiu-jitsu was invented in Brazil.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's a combination
Japanese.
of Japanese martial art, and then it was perfected in Brazil, and It just sounds better to say BJJ than JJ. I think.
I agree.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
there's
It's pretty interesting.
But jiu-jitsu is it's not to tangent, but there's a lot of business leaders and male and female that are getting into jiu-jitsu because what you learn on the mat is more than a sport or a martial art. It's just the mental way to overcome challenges. And you're in a dance with your partner. It's a very intricate.
It absolutely
thing.
is. And in fact, a book I've been reading recently is something called The 32 Principles. And it's a book by Henner Gracie. Exactly. And he talks about how we can use the principles that we learn in jiu-jitsu to, improve and succeed in business and in relationships in life. And that's a wonderful book for anybody out there who may be interested in martial arts, but also using those principles to help guide their life and in business as well.
Very interesting. So, Ange, you mentioned overcoming challenges. So, Steve, you just outlined your 3-year vision, and there will certainly be some challenges in accomplishing some of those. And you've overcome challenges before. What strengths do you recognize about yourself that you've developed from your experiences that will help you get to that 3-year vision and overcome those challenges?
Sure. I think the more time I've spent doing this, I've gotten better at identifying the right people to put on the team, right, to hire. And I think that's probably, maybe looking back, what I consider my greatest success so far is not maybe anything I've done personally, but getting the right people on the team to help to grow the practice. And I think, as the practice expands, one of the challenges I foresee is I can't do everything. I can't micromanage. So learning to kind of delegate more to the great people that I have on my team, I think that's something I need that can be a challenge with expansion, but I think it's something I'm working hard to get better at.
Have you heard the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan?
I have not.
So he's a mentor of mine. I'm getting it for you. It's
Okay.
a great book. It's a quick read, and it's about that very topic, that success comes from just choosing the right people.
And staying out of their way, right?
Right,
I mean,
and things that aren't your unique ability, finding the people that have that unique ability and getting out of their way. Exactly. So
exactly. I think that would be great.
yeah, so we will arrange that. Couple quick questions because we only have a few minutes left. Time flies on the show.
We always say we could pack it more into an hour than a half an hour, but it flies.
I'm going to reverse the order of our closing round questions, but I'm going to start with what's your favorite song, because I know it's going to be an interesting conversation.
So I'm a big Parrot Head Jimmy Buffett fan. So my favorite song has been and probably always will be Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitudes. That just, when I hear that song, my stress level drops, and I just feel like, it's not just a song, it's kind of a philosophy for life. And, maybe I don't, I don't listen to that song every day. I probably should, but instantly I feel my heart rate go down and my stress go down, and it's a wonderful song.
When you mentioned that, it reminded me of a song, not really that genre, but it was from the 80s, Nobody Gonna Break My Stride.
Oh.
That was one of my I used to listen to that every day for years. And even though it's not the kind of music I listen to or I play, but it was just a very motivational song to me that was kind of along those lines, an attitude type of song, I would say. Which, okay, how about what book are you currently reading?
So the one I just mentioned, the 32 Principles, is my jiu-jitsu book. So
I wrote it down for myself. I'm going to take a look at it myself. Pretty cool. And lastly, if you could speak to your younger self, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give you?
I think what I would say to my younger self is, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to go out there. I think, looking back on this, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't start my own business sooner. I guess I just didn't have the confidence to do it. I knew I had the medical training to be able to see patients, but I'm not sure I knew that I could start a business and run a business. But I think if I could go back, I would tell myself, don't hesitate, don't wait, don't procrastinate. Take the opportunity and give it a try. And that's what I would definitely say to my younger self.
You have been very efficient, so much so that we actually have a few minutes left. And one of the things I know that I know you're entrepreneurial aside from your practice? You talked about starting a conference for dermatology. I know you're involved in some other things around dermatology, some new companies and things, and one of those will become a future show of ours. Anything you'd like to mention about that? Some of the things coming down the road?
Sure. A close friend of mine, a man by the name of Nathan Connolly, he has worked in the aesthetic and skincare world for a number of years. And about 6 to 8 months ago, he just decided that, you know what, I'm going to take the leap of faith and I'm going to resign my position and I'm going to start my own company. And I really admire that, that he was able to do that. And so, his goal is to start this company called Invo Aesthetics, and they're going to focus on skincare products and also products to promote hair growth, things like that. And I think he has a wonderful idea, and I'm going to be involved in that. I've invested in the company, and I'm an advisor and going to be on the board. So I think that's another exciting thing that I hope to be involved in, and maybe as part of that 3-year plan, I'd love to see Invo Aesthetics get some traction and get going.
You're still a relatively young man. You've got a lot in front of you. Do you see other entrepreneurial opportunities coming down the road as well?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly I'm open to them. I do have to, find that right balance between, working and life outside of work, right? So I think I have a lot on my plate, and I have some goals, but I also have learned over the years that, life doesn't follow a straight line, and there are lots of twists and turns, and it's okay if you take a turn and it's not your destination. That's all preparation. And so I'm not sure that I have any concrete entrepreneurial plans besides what we discussed, but I am certainly open to opportunities should they present themselves.
And in terms of life not being a straight line, that's for sure. Do you, and you mentioned that the work-life balance, and you mentioned focus on your sons for the next couple of years. Anything else? There's jiu-jitsu. Anything else personally that you'd like to see happen over the next 3 years, or ways you'd like to spend your time?
Well, I'd like to work on my golf game a little bit as well. I'd like to get my handicap under 10. That's the goal for this year. We'll see if it happens.
Yeah,
he's eyeing that brown belt too. I can see it in his face. Yep.
Well, I think that's a wrap for today, and I think it's been a very interesting show. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Steve, and we're going to have you back again and talk about Invo Aesthetics in the future with Nate, hopefully. And everybody have a great day. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you again next week on Founders Forum.
There's something great happening on WWDB 860 AM in Philadelphia.